I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. Each week on this podcast, topic, discussion, story from our lives.
Season 6, Chapter 12.
Critical thinking.
I've been wanting to talk about critical thinking on this podcast for some time now, mainly because in my circle we talk about it a lot. Well, lately we talk less about critical thinking and more about the seeming lack of it. Today I want to explore that part as well. But first, what is critical thinking? First of all, if you are also asking the question, or even wondered about it in the last little while, you are already engaging in a form of it. Congratulations on your critical thinking. The search engine definition is pretty accurate. Critical thinking is objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. Simple and straightforward, but also a lot to unpack. And let me add a word to that definition. Critical thinking is not just an objective analysis and evaluation. It's a deliberate act. That part is key. An active, deliberate method used to make better judgments and decisions. If you're just starting out, beware. Critical thinking can be exhausting. But if you embrace it, put in the time and effort, the rewards are endless. And after a while, it just becomes second nature. You become wired in. It's like starting a daily exercise regime. It's tough. And for the first few weeks, you actually feel worse instead of better. But then eventually, you find you can't live without it. Critical thinking, the deliberate act of analysis and evaluation in order to make better judgments and decisions. Decisions. That's the first daunting task of this. Because decisions, well, we have to make dozens of them every day. What time should I set the alarm for? What should I have for breakfast? What to wear? What if the VP is at the meeting? I have a crush on this cashier. Should I say something? Should I get a new phone? Should I go to that party? Should I redo my mortgage? Who will I vote for? Do I want fries with that? What should I get for their birthday? Should I get off the freeway at this point? What's my plan? It never ends. There are so many daily decisions we have to make that it's often easier just to go about a routine. Do it the way you always do it. Or even follow the crowd. Just go with the popular choice. That's not always so bad. It would be difficult to apply critical thinking to all of life's daily minutiae. So we differentiate. This is important. This is trivial. This is urgent. This is, I don't care. And again, just by doing that, guess what? You are engaging in a form of critical thinking. Those of us who partake in this all-important procedure tend to save our critical thinking skills for the more weighty matters. When we analyze and evaluate the different aspects of an issue, it's like we are having an argument or debate within ourselves as to how to reach a fair and logical conclusion. Even if we gather information from other people and we have open discussions, ultimately the decision is ours and ours alone. We must privately weigh the pros and cons, the truths, the probabilities, etc., and then make our judgment. At the end of the day, critical thinking is a private, personal affair. If we're going to have this argument with ourselves, it is important, therefore, to understand what an argument is. And I mean argument not in the personal, disruptive, confrontational sense, more in the legal, intellectual manner, as in they make a good argument for or against. Argument.
I came here for a good argument.
No, you didn't. You came here for an argument.
Well, an argument's not the same as contradiction.
Can be.
No, it can't. An argument's a connected series of statements to establish a definite proposition.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. It isn't just contradiction.
Look, if I argue with you, I must take up a contrary position.
But it isn't just saying no, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. Argument's an intellectual process. Contradiction is just the automatic gainsaying of anything the other person says.
No, it isn't.
Yeah, they pretty much got it right, didn't they? An argument is a set of premises used to reach a conclusion. And in evaluating the argument, you must ask, does the premise support the conclusion? The gray car is the best deal because it's $2,000 less than similar cars. The premise of a lower sticker price seems to support the best deal argument. But does the gray car get poorer mileage? Does it have a reputation for breaking down? Perhaps a lesser warranty? All things that could negate those initial savings very quickly. Premises are usually ampliative or deductive. A solid premise will allow me to deduce a solid conclusion. An ampliative, well, it's just like the word implies. It is adding or amping up one of the facts, which is either false or doesn't deliver the full picture. Ampliative. So if we understand that an argument is a set of premises to lead to a conclusion or decision, then we must understand and remember what the premises are and how they are presented. Keyword premises, the plural, one premise rarely can decide an argument. A key element in learning critical thinking, therefore, is the gathering of information. If we are going to critical think a car purchase, sticker price is but one premise, one factor. Important, gather information. And as you do, there are these considerations. Number one, what is the source of the information? How does he know that gray cars always break down? Is there data? Or did he just have a friend who had one that always broke down? What assumptions or interpretations might come with that source of information? Hey, if one source is a mechanic and the other guy just hates the color gray, you might interpret the information differently. Not only must you think of their assumptions and interpretations, but what are your filters? What does information look like when you get through with it? Constantly evaluate the source of your information. Multi-source as much as possible. As you gather the information, make sure you understand the angles, because maybe there's information out there that you never even thought to gather. All right, then let's move on. Once you are satisfied that you have all the information you need, you're on to this next step of critical thinking. You have to apply the information. If you've done the first job well, application of the facts should be fairly easy. Let's say you've whittled it down to this gray car and two others. So next you consider all the implications of each action. What if I bought the gray car or the green car or the blue car or the others and so forth? Also ask yourself this: what is shaping my opinions? What is shaping my approach? Again, understanding your own filters, the applications, the implications. One of the biggest attributes of a good critical thinker is this: exploring other points of view, especially the direct opposite ones. So let's say you're pretty much decided now against the gray car, yet a lot of people seem to buy and drive those gray cars. Why? Why and how can the opposite of what I think be of great appeal to someone else? You may not always arrive at an answer for that, but the process of it is important. Obviously, a big part of critical thinking is information, gathering, applying, implication, even opposing. Critical thinking is not just the ability to be critical, although that's a part of it. In the end, your decision has to make sense within the realm of reason and logic. At the end of critical thinking, a decision can't just feel right, it must be right. Jumping to conclusions is definitely forbidden. And briefly, in this area of when something just feels right, well, I once read and still believe that emotion is the sum total of all of our knowledge. All of our knowledge. And that's what it's got to be. This go with your gut premise only works if you apply everything in your database. Example, if the team is thinking of going for it on 4th down, whose gut do you trust to make that decision? The coach? The quarterback? Or the face-painted drunk guy up in the 87th row? Even a feels-right decision has to be based on information, evaluation, application, and implication, the sum total of all of your knowledge. Even recent brain science has verified that the emotional and logical parts of your brain actually do work together and often help each other out. Isn't that nice? There's one thing that I've left out so far, and it is very important. Some people put it right at the top of critical thinking, but I like putting it all throughout. It is the question. No, seriously, question is what it is. What is your question? What are you thinking about? Did you properly formulate your question? Should I get the gray car? What's the best deal on a car? Maybe what you're thinking about is, do I really need a new car? Do I need a car at all? What's the deal with e-bikes and public transit? Make sure you are addressing the correct issue, solving the actual problem. So that's crucial, formulating the correct question, but then part of the remaining process includes more questions. Critical thinking is a constant asking of questions. Critical thinkers are inquisitive, and they're modest, and they have a sense of discovery and excitement at the information they will derive from asking more questions.
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
Good critical thinkers are generally creative, reflective, and adaptable. Questions are the main weapon in our arsenal. As a matter of fact, people who fear critical thinkers are often trying to get away with something. Because what do they always say? That guy asks too many questions. So there you have it, a simple step-by-step way to be a critical thinker. Gather information, ask a lot of questions, get many points of view, consider the applications and implications. And yeah, you might miss something along the way. But even invoking this process already puts you ahead of a lot of other people. You will be making smarter decisions. The other factor is, and I guess you could file this under implications, but I like to make it a separate consideration. Once I make a decision, how long will I have to live with it? What are the consequences? I made a mistake voting for that guy, and now it's like 4 more years. I also made a mistake switching to decaf. Well, that could be corrected in 4 seconds. Excuse me, double espresso over here. Most decisions aren't exactly written in stone. You can change your mind. And even if they were at one time, hey, Jedediah, you lied. So what, I can't lie? It's not like that's written in stone. Well, actually it is. It's one of the commandments, and we wrote them in stone. All right, then. Thanks for the info. My point is that even when something's written in stone, there are interpretations and options. Critical thinking doesn't always make you right. It just means you got to a more solid place. You have a much better chance of being right. Yes, you still could be incorrect. If so, you just start the process all over again, because now you have some new information. I was wrong. The worst are the undecided. There is just too much information out there today for someone to be undecided. The undecided often use that as an excuse. Oh, there's just too much. Undecided doesn't mean there's too much out there. It means you didn't absorb enough and likely aren't critical thinking. Survey after survey says there are more and more disengaged and undecided people. And that's why we feel there's much less critical thinking out there. Critical thinkers make decisions. And just by way of fun fact, You know where critical thinking really began? I'll tell you, the more and more podcasts I do that involve historical evolution, the more I appreciate how many things started with Socrates. That was one big-brained bobcat, that Socrates. Who knows how he even walked around with that giant melon full of ideas. I would have had to have a couple of guys walking beside me, holding up my gargantuan noggin with the oversized brain. Gray matter just oozing out of my ears, nostrils, and eye sockets. Socrates was really the father of critical thinking. Now, Socrates was eventually accused of impiety and corrupting the youth. He was given hemlock. Thing is, Socrates didn't really preach or lecture or hold political rallies. Socrates simply sat around and chatted with those who were interested. He didn't expound so much about his knowledge of things, but rather offered stories and premises. His followers would say, "Ah, yes, Socrates, but what if this?" And Socrates would reply with, "Okay, but what if that?" And then they would sit around and do this all day until it was time to go for souvlaki. One of his most ardent fans was Plato. And Plato would eventually write these thoughts and philosophies down in that particular method and style. Conversations. What if man were this and God was that? Ah, but what if man was that and God was this? Conversations. This became known as the Socratic method of teaching. During the Reformation, it was used to teach religion, eventually also used to teach medicine, economics, and law. Medical students today still do this. They offer their diagnosis to their teacher, and the teacher-doctor in return offers new information and new premises. The Supreme Courts of most free nations still use this Socratic way to make judgments. They offer a series of deductive premises, and then they what-if them to the nth degree until they reach a decision. And I get lately we don't so much agree with all of the Supreme Court decisions. Perhaps we find some of their premises ampliative. But this method, the Socratic method, is still used today and in my opinion still valid, even some 2,400 years after Socrates hoovered the hemlock. Amazing, isn't it? Socrates was the father of critical thinking. Plato, one of his best students, eventually set up an academy. One of his best students was Aristotle. Aristotle is the father of Western logic. And I say this to make the point that a diagram of critical thinking would probably include straight lines from questions to premises to conclusions. Beware of the circular logic or reasoning. That's when a premise assumes a conclusion. Gray cars are the best cars because I have one and I only buy the best cars. Huh? Circular logic, it's almost always wrong. Circular logic is in fact illogical. Right, Spock?
I can answer none of your questions at this time.
Thank you. So I've just offered a brief and simple, I believe, tutorial on critical thinking. So if it's that simple, why does there seem to be a general lack of it in society today? Good question. Well, I have a few ideas. These are my premises. You may have added info. For one thing, there is easy access to so much information these days, not to mention the misinformation and disinformation. It can be more difficult to step back and identify meaning and significance. Hard to tell what the key points are when everyone is shouting. It's like we're all typing in caps all the time, and social media amplifies every word, especially the negative, and then it swirls like an eddy. People get caught up in that circular motion, never mind reaching a conclusion. It's all we can do just to keep from drowning. Secondly, critical thinking isn't taught in schools. I mean, maybe along the way you have some rogue teacher who genuinely wants you all to think for yourselves. Maybe it's taught in post-secondary institutions. But for a lot of people, that's too late. Do parents teach it to their own kids? Maybe some do. But most moms and dads would just rather you do what they say. And why? Because I said so. Teaching critical thinking in the school system K through 12, well, there's just no money in it. Schools tend to be funded based on A, population, then B, grade scores. High grade scores, more money. And high grade scores come from correct answers on term exams, and not from the ability to apply critical thinking to a curriculum. As a result, your high school diploma means you probably learned something, and it may give you access to further education, but the critical thinking skills aren't there. School funding methods have dumbed down at least 2, if not 3, generations of young people. Schools used to brag about creating the leaders of tomorrow. Now they are mostly content with supervising the followers of today. A good day at school means no lockdowns. Third factor, artificial intelligence. Created to a height where even emotions are expressed as algorithms. Why have critical thinking when we can just feed data into a machine and see what it tells us? Machines. I don't think I have to expound on the dangers of that slippery slope. Critical thinking has reached such low levels that I'm reminded of that old joke. Why is pizza like sex? Because even when it's bad, it's still pretty good. Bad pizza, bad sex, and even bad critical thinking. These days, I'm just grateful to get it.
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I can answer none of your questions at this time.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.